I used to give storm updates on local TV, the kind where you stand in front of a map and tell people when it's safe to come out. I lost that job after calling an all clear too early during a fast-moving line of storms. Nothing catastrophic, nothing that made national news, but enough that people stopped trusting what I said. The station let me go a week later. The night shift at the Regional Storm Warning Center felt different. No cameras, no voice, just radar in and alerts out. The system handled the rest. That was the part I liked. You don't decide what people hear. You follow protocol, verify the signature, issue the alert. Once it's sent, it's final. No revisions, no second attempts. They made that clear during training, but no one explained why it mattered. On my third night working alone, I issued a warning on a weak rotation just to stay ahead of it. 30 seconds later, the storm tightened into something real. I moved to update the alert. The system wouldn't let me. At first, I assumed it was a timing issue, something in the interface lagging behind the radar feed. The system we used wasn't new, but it wasn't unreliable either. It logged everything in sequence: verification, issuance, distribution, each step time-stamped and locked as it moved forward. I checked the alert ID and pulled up the record. It was already marked as completed. Not just issued, completed, like the process had run its full course the moment I hit send. That didn't match how it was supposed to work. Alerts stayed active until conditions weakened or moved out of range. That's why updates existed. I tried to open the edit field again, not changing anything yet, just confirming access. The option was there, but it was grayed out. No override, no admin option, nothing. The system wasn't lagging. It was refusing input. I checked the radar again to make sure I wasn't overreacting. The velocity scan had tightened further. Clear rotation now, not borderline anymore. The hook echo was starting to form on reflectivity, not fully defined, but enough to confirm escalation. This wasn't a case where the initial warning still covered it. The polygon I had issued was too small, drawn around the weaker signature from 30 seconds earlier. The storm had already pushed beyond it. I zoomed out, recalculated the track in my head, and moved back to the alert panel. The system still showed the original warning as final. No extension option, no update field, just a closed entry with a clean timestamp, like nothing else needed to be done. I opened the protocol document from memory more than necessity, scrolling through the sections I had already read twice during training. It wasn't a long file, mostly standard procedures, verification thresholds, escalation paths, communication timing. The rule about alerts was there, exactly the way I remembered it. Once an alert is issued, it cannot be reissued, updated, or duplicated. At the time, it had sounded like a safeguard against flooding the system with repeated warnings. Something technical, not operational. Standing there, with the radar showing clear intensification, it felt different. It wasn't preventing duplication. It was preventing correction. I went back to the system and tried a different approach, starting a new alert entry for the same cell instead of modifying the original. The system didn't reject the entry immediately. It let me fill out the fields: location, storm type, verification level, everything up to the point where I would normally assign an ID. When I hit confirm, the screen held for a second longer than usual, just enough to make me notice it. Then the entry cleared itself. No error message, no warning, just gone, like I hadn't entered anything at all. I checked the log to see if it had been saved under a different ID. Nothing, no trace of the attempt. The original alert remained the only one in the system for that cell, fixed in place, tied to conditions that no longer matched what the radar was showing. I leaned back in the chair and watched the radar loop for a few seconds without touching anything. The storm didn't slow down. The rotation tightened further, and the track shifted slightly east, bringing it closer to a cluster of small towns that weren't fully covered by the original warning. In the studio, I would have said something immediately, adjusted the timing, expanded the area, filled the gap before it mattered. Here, there was no voice, no live correction, just the system, and whatever it allowed. I moved the cursor back over the alert record, looking for any field I might have missed, any way to reopen it without breaking protocol outright. There wasn't one. The supervisor on duty that night was listed on the internal roster, but he wasn't on the floor. That wasn't unusual. Overnight shifts were often handled solo, unless something escalated beyond standard thresholds. I could have called him, flagged it as a system issue, pushed it up the chain. Instead, I stayed where I was and kept checking the radar. Part of that was habit. Part of it was something else. The protocol was clear, and I had already broken enough rules in my last job by trusting my own judgment over structure. This time, the system was the structure. If it was locking the alert, there had to be a reason for it, even if I didn't see it yet. Another scan came through, and the rotation signature held steady, stronger than before, but consistent now, not fluctuating. I checked the downstream data feeds, regional overlays, adjacent center inputs, looking for any discrepancy that might explain the lock. Everything matched what I was seeing locally. No conflicting reports, no missing data, nothing that would justify freezing the alert in its initial state. I moved back to the protocol file again, slower this time, reading each line instead of skimming. There was no additional explanation, no exception clause, no note about escalation scenarios, just the same sentence, unchanged, sitting in the middle of the document like it didn't need context. I went back to the alert record one more time and looked at the timeline in detail. Verification, issuance, distribution, all time-stamped within the same second. That wasn't normal. Even on a fast system, there was always a small delay between steps, a fraction of time where the process moved forward in sequence. This one had no gap. It looked like the entire life cycle had been completed at once, compressed into a single moment. I checked the system clock to make sure it was accurate. It matched the radar timestamp exactly. No drift, no offset. The alert hadn't just been issued quickly. It had been finalized immediately. I sat there for a second with my hand on the mouse, not moving it, just feeling the slight tension in my grip as I watched the radar update again. The storm continued east, holding structure, staying organized longer than it should have at that stage. I didn't try to override the system again. I didn't call the supervisor. I didn't start a new alert entry. Instead, I opened the observation log and began typing what I was seeing in plain terms, recording the changes without trying to push them through the alert system. It wasn't a solution, but it was something the protocol allowed. When I finished the entry, I saved it and watched it appear in the log under my ID, time-stamped normally, separate from the alert. For a moment, That felt like control. Then the system generated a new notification at the bottom of the screen, tied to the same storm ID I had just logged. It wasn't marked as an update. It was marked as incoming. The notification didn't trigger any sound, which was the first reason I almost missed it. It just appeared at the bottom of the interface, sliding into place the same way routine system messages did, quiet and easy to ignore if you weren't already focused on that part of the screen. It was tied to the same storm ID as my original alert, but the label didn't match anything I had seen during training or in the documentation. Not update, not extension, not verification, just a single word, incoming. I moved the cursor over it and opened the entry slowly, half expecting it to disappear the way my earlier attempt had. It didn't. The layout matched a standard alert record exactly. Same fields, same structure, same timeline panel, but everything inside it was blank, like the system had created a second version of the alert without assigning any data to it yet. I checked the active queue immediately to see if it had been routed to another station or flagged for supervisor review. It hadn't. The entry wasn't attached to any lane, wasn't marked as pending, and didn't show up in any of the standard workflow categories. It just existed in the system without a path, like it had been generated outside the normal intake process. That wasn't something the system was designed to allow. Every alert had to move through a defined sequence, even if it was delayed or escalated. I opened the details panel and looked for origin data, anything that would show how it had been created. There was nothing. No intake, no verification step, no operator ID. The original alert was still there, unchanged, marked as completed. This second entry didn't replace it. It sat beside it, separate and unlinked. I looked back at the radar before doing anything else, forcing myself to anchor in something real instead of the interface. The storm had continued to organize, the rotation tightening into a clear signature that no longer needed interpretation. The track had shifted slightly east, just enough to push it beyond the polygon I had drawn earlier. That was the kind of change you're trained to correct immediately. I moved back to the new entry and started filling in the fields, not because the system had assigned it to me, but because it was the only place that would accept updated data. Location, storm type, verification level. I entered each one carefully, matching what I saw on the radar without rushing through it. When I reached the final step, I paused, waiting for the system to intervene the way it had before. This time, it didn't. No automatic status appeared, no timestamp filled in ahead of me, no lock preventing input. The field stayed open, waiting. That alone felt different enough to slow me down for a second longer than I expected. Then I assigned the alert ID and confirmed it. The system accepted the entry immediately. No delay, no hesitation. The record populated in full, timestamps aligning exactly with my input. The status marked as issued the same way a normal alert would be. For a moment, that steadied something in me that had been off since the first alert locked. The process looked correct again, structured and predictable. I checked the active queue, expecting to see it move into place alongside the original alert. It didn't show up anywhere. I opened the distribution panel right after that, expecting to see the new alert move through the same channels as the first one. That's the whole point of issuing it. Once it's confirmed, the system handles the rest automatically. Sirens, broadcast feeds, downstream notifications to local agencies, all of it runs without you touching anything else. The second alert didn't trigger any of that. The panel stayed empty, no endpoints activated, no confirmation pings, nothing moving outward from the record I had just created. I went back to the alert itself and checked the status again to make sure I hadn't missed a step. It still read as issued, fully complete, timestamp aligned with my input. From the system's perspective, it was finished. It just hadn't been sent anywhere. I pulled the first alert back up and placed them side by side on the screen, lining up the fields so I could compare them without switching tabs. The difference was immediate. The original warning had a full distribution log, timestamps for each channel, confirmations from endpoints, a clean sequence showing it had gone out exactly the way it was supposed to. The second one had none of that. Same structure, same status, but the entire distribution section was blank, like that part of the process had been skipped instead of completed. Together, the two alerts described the storm accurately. Separately, neither one did. The first was already outdated. The second existed only inside the system, invisible to anything outside of it. I leaned back slightly and let the radar loop run for a few seconds without touching anything, just watching the storm track forward in real time. It followed the updated path I had entered into the second alert, not the original one that had actually been sent. That was the part that made it harder to ignore. The system wasn't just lagging behind or misinterpreting the data. It was dividing it. One version went out and stayed fixed. Everything after that stayed internal, recorded but contained. I moved the cursor back over the distribution panel and scanned through every tab again, looking for any kind of manual trigger, something that would let me push the second alert out without breaking the rule about reissuing. There wasn't one. I went back to the protocol file again, slower this time, reading it the way I should have the first time instead of skimming it for the parts I thought I needed. The wording hadn't changed. Once an alert is issued, it cannot be reissued, updated, or duplicated. There was nothing about secondary entries, nothing about internal records that didn't distribute. No exception, no clarification, nothing that explained what I was looking at. I scrolled further down into sections that covered system behavior during high-volume events, edge cases where multiple cells overlapped or merged. Still nothing. If this was part of the design, it wasn't written for operators to understand. It was something you were expected to follow without seeing the full process. I checked the timestamps again, not because I expected them to change, but because they were the only part of the system that still behaved consistently. The first alert had been verified, issued, and distributed all within the same second, compressed into a single moment with no visible delay. The second one followed the same pattern up to issuance, then stopped. The sequence was clean in both cases, no missing steps, no errors, just a break in what happened after. I moved the cursor over the storm ID and traced it through the system, checking every reference point I could access. Both alerts were tied to it. Both were valid entries. Only one had been allowed to leave the system. I sat there with my hand resting on the mouse, not clicking anything, just watching the radar update again as the storm pushed further east. The gap between the two alerts was widening now, not just in position, but in timing. The original warning covered a path the storm had already moved past. The second tracked where it actually was, but no one outside this room would see it. I thought about calling the supervisor again, running it up as a system issue, forcing someone else to step into it and confirm what I was seeing. Instead, I stayed where I was and watched the screen. The system hadn't broken. It had made a decision. I didn't know yet if it was one I was supposed to follow or fix. I stayed on the radar longer than I should have, letting the loop cycle through several scans without touching anything, not because I needed more data, but because I needed something that behaved the way it was supposed to. The structure held steady across each update, the rotation staying tight instead of breaking down the way weaker signatures usually do after a few minutes. At that point, there wasn't much left to interpret. It was organized, consistent, and moving with a direction that didn't drift between scans. If I had been in the studio, I would have been talking over it already, adjusting the timing, extending the path, filling in the gaps before anyone watching had time to notice them. Here, I wasn't doing any of that. I was watching two versions of the same storm exist at the same time, one fixed where I had first drawn it, already behind, and the other continuing forward in my head, matching the data, but not existing anywhere that would actually reach the people in its path. I opened the second alert again, slower than before, not because I expected it to change, but because I needed to confirm that it was still exactly where I had left it, unchanged by anything happening outside of it. The record hadn't moved. Same fields, same timestamps, same issued status sitting there without any connection to the distribution layer that would normally carry it outward. I scrolled through the entire entry, line by line, forcing myself to read it instead of skimming, looking for anything that might have updated while I was focused on the radar. There was nothing. It was complete in every way that mattered internally, but disconnected from everything else. That wasn't a delay. It wasn't waiting for anything. It had reached a point and stopped, like the process had been intentionally cut in half at the moment it should have continued. I moved to the downstream feeds again, but this time I didn't just glance at them to confirm what I already knew. I went through each one the way I was trained to when something didn't line up, checking the logs, the timestamps, the confirmation markers that showed whether an alert had actually been transmitted. The first warning was there across every channel, clean and complete, with no gaps in the sequence. The second one wasn't just missing. It didn't exist in those systems at all. There wasn't even a failed transmission record or a placeholder entry indicating that something had tried and stopped. It was as if it had never left the main system, even though that same system showed it as issued and complete. That kind of disconnect isn't random. Everything here is built to prevent exactly that. I went back to the protocol document again, but this time I wasn't reading it in order. I searched it, scanning for anything that might explain how two valid alerts tied to the same storm could be treated differently without triggering any kind of error or escalation. Terms like duplicate, secondary, internal, distribution, none of them showed up in a way that matched what I was seeing. The rule about alerts not being reissued was still the only thing that applied, but it didn't explain this behavior. It only explained why the first alert stayed fixed. It didn't explain why the second one existed at all, if it wasn't meant to move beyond the system that created it. I sat there with the document open, cursor blinking in the search field, aware of the silence in the room in a way I hadn't noticed before. The radar updated again, and the storm continued to follow the track I had entered into the second alert, not the original one that had actually been sent out. That was the part that made it harder to treat this as a system glitch or a delay that would resolve on its own. The data wasn't splitting, the system was. I pulled up the map overlay and traced the projected path forward, checking what lay ahead of it with more attention than I needed to, as if looking at the map longer would change what was there. Small towns, scattered houses, long stretches of open land where people rely on warnings because there isn't anything else to go on. I followed the boundary of the first alert across the same map and saw exactly where it fell short. The gap wasn't subtle anymore. It was wide enough that it couldn't be ignored. I moved the cursor back to the second alert and hovered over the status field again, not because I expected it to change, but because I needed to look at it long enough to understand what it actually meant now. It still read as issued, still marked as final, the same word that had seemed routine during training when everything was explained as a clean sequence of steps. Back then, final just meant complete, something you didn't need to think about again once it was done. Now, it meant something else entirely. It meant fixed in a way that didn't allow anything after it to affect what had already left the system. I opened the details panel again and went through every field slowly, not skipping anything this time, checking each section as if I might have overlooked something small that explained the difference. There wasn't anything hidden there. Every field ended cleanly, exactly where it was supposed to, but none of them connected this alert to the part of the system that actually sent information out into the world. I thought about forcing it, trying to rebuild part of the process from the beginning in a way that might trigger distribution indirectly, but there wasn't a clear way to do that without running into the same boundary again. Every action I could take either led back to the same closed state or created another record that stayed contained in exactly the same way this one did. I moved the cursor back to the main panel and let it rest there, not clicking, not entering anything new, just watching the interface the way I used to watch radar loops when I didn't trust what I was seeing yet. The system wasn't behaving randomly or inconsistently. That would have been easier to dismiss. It was following a pattern that held across everything I checked. One alert went out and stayed fixed. Everything that came after that point stayed inside, complete in its own way, but cut off from anything beyond this room. I stayed there longer than I should have before checking the clock. I checked the clock again, not because I needed the time, but because I wanted to see how long I had been sitting there trying to reconcile two things that didn't line up. It had been less than 10 minutes since I issued the first alert, which in real terms wasn't long enough for anything to feel out of control. On air, that would have been a single segment, a brief update, something you could adjust in the next pass without anyone thinking twice about it. Here, it felt stretched out, extended by the gap between what I could see on the radar and what the system allowed me to do with it. I went back to the timeline on both alerts and aligned them side by side again, not just glancing at them, but matching each step in order: verification, issuance, and then the split. It happened at the same point every time, without variation. The radar updated again, and the storm continued moving into the area that the first alert didn't cover anymore. I followed it with my eyes without touching the controls, letting the movement settle into something steady instead of reacting to it immediately the way I would have before. The structure held, the rotation stayed organized, and the track remained consistent enough that there was no reasonable argument for leaving the warning where it was. I thought about adjusting it again, about trying one more time to push an update through, even though I already knew what would happen. That impulse felt familiar in a way I didn't like. It was the same kind of decision-making that had cost me my last job, choosing to act based on what I thought was right instead of what the system allowed. I looked back at both alerts again, one visible and already out in the world, the other complete but contained inside the system, and realized the difference between them wasn't an error or a delay that would correct itself if I waited long enough. It was a boundary that the system enforced without explaining it, something built into the process at a level I didn't have access to. The first alert defined what left the system and became real for everyone else who depended on it. The second defined what stayed inside, accurate but unseen, recorded but not allowed to change anything beyond this room. I kept my hand on the mouse and didn't move it, letting the radar update again in the corner of my vision while the interface stayed exactly the same. The storm kept moving forward and the system stayed where it was. I didn't call the supervisor, even though the thought came up more than once and stayed long enough for me to fully form the explanation in my head. I knew exactly how I would describe it, what tone I would use, how I would keep it grounded in system behavior instead of turning it into something that sounded like I was guessing. But I didn't reach for the phone. I stayed where I was, one hand resting near the mouse, the other on the edge of the desk, and watched the radar cycle through another full scan before I touched anything else. The storm held together longer than it should have at that stage, not weakening or breaking apart the way marginal rotations usually do once they move past the initial phase. The structure stayed clean, consistent, and directional, and the track I had already mapped in my head aligned exactly with the second alert, the one that hadn't been sent anywhere. Meanwhile, the first alert, the only one that actually left the system, continued to drift further behind with each update. The difference between them wasn't small anymore. It wasn't something you could ignore or explain away as timing. It was a widening gap that stayed visible no matter how many times the radar refreshed. I opened the second alert again, not because I intended to change anything, but because I needed to look at the timeline closely enough to understand what it was actually showing me. At a glance, everything still looked correct. Verification, issuance, then a clean stop. But when I slowed down and read the timestamps instead of just scanning them, the sequence didn't line up the way it should have. The issued time matched the exact moment I had confirmed it, but the verification step was slightly earlier, just enough to stand out once you paid attention to it. I pulled up the first alert and compared them side by side, aligning each step in order. The same pattern was there. Verification had been logged before I had actually made the decision to issue the alert, not after. It wasn't a delay or a rounding error. It was consistent across both entries, and once I saw it, it didn't go away. I didn't move the cursor right away after noticing that. I just sat there and let it settle, forcing myself not to react the way I normally would when something didn't line up. It wasn't a large difference in time, not something that would stand out during normal operation, but it was enough to change the direction of what I thought I was looking at. I checked the system clock again, then the radar timestamps, making sure there wasn't any drift or offset between them that could explain it. Everything matched exactly. The system wasn't behind or out of sync. It was recording steps ahead of me, not after. I moved the cursor back over the second alert and hovered on the timeline, tracing the sequence slowly from verification to issuance, trying to find a point where my actions actually came first, instead of following something that had already been logged. The radar updated again, and I glanced at it automatically before looking back at the alert. The storm had shifted slightly north, just enough to adjust the projected path in a way I hadn't accounted for yet. My hand moved toward the controls out of habit, ready to enter the change into the system, then stopped before I clicked anything. Instead of acting on it, I watched the radar loop through another full cycle, making sure the shift held and wasn't just a temporary fluctuation between scans. When it stayed consistent, I moved back to the alert panel and left the cursor hovering over the verification field. I didn't enter anything. I didn't confirm the change. I just waited, holding still long enough to see if the system would move before I did, the same way it had with the earlier entries. It didn't take long. The verification timestamp appeared first, filling in the field without any input from me, aligning exactly with the change I had just confirmed visually on the radar but hadn't acted on yet. I kept my hand still, not touching the mouse, watching the screen closely enough to catch any delay or transition between steps. There wasn't one. A second later, the issuance timestamp followed, completing the sequence as if I had already confirmed and sent the update myself. The alert didn't change its distribution status. It didn't leave the system or trigger any external channels, but the internal record moved forward anyway, logging actions I hadn't taken as if they had already happened somewhere ahead of me. I didn't react right away when I saw it happen again. I didn't move right away after that, not because I was unsure of what I was seeing, but because I needed to hold still long enough to see if the system would do it again without me. I kept my hand on the mouse, not clicking, not even shifting slightly, and watched the timeline instead of the radar for once. The next scan came in, and I saw the shift on the radar. At the same moment, I saw the verification field update on the alert. I hadn't moved. I hadn't even decided what I was going to do about it yet. The system logged the step anyway, filling it in cleanly, like it had already been confirmed. I stayed still, forcing myself not to react, and a second later, the issuance timestamp followed, completing the sequence before I had taken a single action. I sat there and watched it finish, watched the system move forward without me, and that was the moment it stopped feeling like I was catching up to it. It felt like it was already ahead of me, not just recording what I did, but recording what I was about to do before I did it, like the sequence existed before I reached it. I leaned back slightly in the chair and let my eyes move between the radar and the timeline, not focusing on either one long enough to lose track of the other. The storm continued to follow the path I had just seen reflected in the updated timestamps, not the one I had originally issued. That was the part that made it harder to dismiss as a logging issue or a display delay. The system wasn't just recording actions ahead of me. It was aligning those actions with what the storm was about to do before I entered anything. I moved the cursor back over the second alert again, this time without opening any fields, just watching the interface itself, the way the panels shifted slightly as new data came in. Nothing looked broken, nothing lagged. Everything moved in the same steady, controlled way. It always had. I thought about testing it directly, forcing a mismatch between what I did and what the system expected, but there wasn't a clean way to do that without breaking protocol completely. Every action I could take followed the same sequence the system had already started logging on its own. I could wait, but waiting wasn't neutral anymore. It just gave the system time to fill in the steps ahead of me. I looked back at the radar again, tracking the storm as it pushed further along the updated path, the one that only existed in the second alert. The gap between that and the first warning was wide enough now that it wasn't just inaccurate. It was misleading in a way that would matter to anyone relying on it to make a decision. I opened the second alert one more time and watched the timeline as the next scan came through, not moving the cursor, not entering anything, just holding position and waiting. The radar shifted again, a small adjustment in direction that changed where the storm would cross the next section of road. I kept my hands still and watched the timeline. The verification field updated first, filling in without input, followed by the issuance timestamp a second later, completing the sequence the same way it had before. The system wasn't reacting to what I did. It was moving forward on its own, and I was matching it after the fact without realizing it until now. I closed the alert and leaned forward again, closer to the screen than I needed to be. For a few seconds, I didn't look at the radar at all. I kept my eyes on the system, on the way the interface held steady between updates, on the way the field stayed open just long enough to make it seem like I still had a role in what was happening. Then the next scan came through, and I looked back automatically, following the storm as it continued along the same projected path the system had already logged ahead of me. I moved the cursor slightly, not selecting anything, just enough to feel the resistance in my hand again. If I entered something now, it wouldn't lead anything. It would just confirm what the system had already recorded. I sat there and let that settle. The gap between what I thought I was doing and what had already been done, narrowing until it didn't feel like a gap anymore. I didn't move right away after that, and it took me a second to realize that I had been holding the same position longer than I normally would without even noticing it. My hand stayed on the mouse, not clicking, not even shifting slightly, just resting there, while the system kept moving without me. The radar updated again, and I watched the storm push further along the path I had already seen reflected in the second alert, not the one that had actually been sent. The structure held together in a way that made it harder to ignore, not weakening or breaking apart the way borderline rotations usually do after a few cycles. At the same time, the system filled in the next steps ahead of me again, verification appearing first, then issuance, both logged with timestamps that matched the moment I recognized the change on the radar, not the moment I acted on it, which meant the sequence wasn't following me anymore, even though I was still sitting there like it was. I opened the first alert again and forced myself to slow down enough to actually read the timeline instead of just looking at it. Before, I had treated it like something already finished, something I didn't need to question once it was out. Now, I had to look at it the same way I had been looking at the second one, as something that might not be telling the full story. The sequence was clean, just like it should have been, but the timing didn't line up the way I remembered it happening. Verification showed up slightly earlier than I recalled making the call, and issuance followed immediately after, closing the process without leaving space for hesitation. At the time, I hadn't noticed, because I wasn't looking for anything wrong. Now, it felt like I couldn't look at anything else. I pulled both alerts up, side by side, so I could see them together without switching between screens, keeping them in the same line of sight while the radar continued updating in the background. The structure was identical between them. Every field in the same place, every step following the same order: verification, issuance, and then the point where everything split into two different outcomes. The first alert moved outward instantly, distributed across every channel it was connected to, becoming real for anyone who depended on it. The second one stayed inside the system, complete in its structure, but cut off from anything beyond it. It updated internally, reflecting the storm exactly as it continued to develop, but it never reached the point where it would actually matter outside this room. And the longer I looked at it, the less that felt like an accident. The radar updated again, and I didn't touch anything this time, not even out of habit. I didn't verify the change, didn't move the cursor toward the input fields, didn't give the system any signal that I was about to act. I just watched. The pattern repeated exactly the way it had before. Verification appeared on its own, filling in the field without any input from me, followed by issuance a second later, completing the step as if I had already confirmed it myself. I stayed still long enough to make sure I wasn't missing something subtle, some small input or delay that could explain it. There wasn't anything there. The system moved forward on its own, logging actions that matched what I was seeing before I actually did anything, and the alert updated internally again without ever reaching the part where it would be sent out. I leaned back slightly in the chair and let my eyes move between the radar and the alert panel, without settling on either one long enough to lose track of the other. The storm continued to hold its structure, moving steadily along the projected path, not weakening, not drifting, not giving me any reason to question what I was seeing. The difference between the two alerts became harder to ignore with each update that came in. One stayed fixed and visible, already outdated, but still the only version anyone outside would ever see. The other stayed accurate, updating with every change, but contained inside the system where it didn't affect anything beyond this room. I realized I hadn't actually made a decision since the first alert, and that everything after that had just been me following something that had already been set in motion before I even knew it was happening. I moved the cursor back to the second alert again, even though I already knew what I was going to see when I opened it, and I kept it there longer than I needed to, watching the panel instead of interacting with it, letting another radar update pass without touching anything. The fields were filled, the timeline updated, everything sitting in place exactly the way it had been the last time I looked. Except now, I wasn't trying to change it, or correct it, or force it to move forward. I hovered over the distribution section and stayed there, not because I expected it to suddenly activate, but because I needed to confirm that nothing was going to happen unless I made it happen. The system didn't react. It didn't shift, didn't update, didn't push anything outward, even as the alert itself became more accurate with each new scan. It stayed contained in a way that didn't feel like a delay anymore. It felt like a decision that had already been made. I leaned forward again and shifted my attention back to the first alert, the one that had already been sent, and I forced myself to follow its boundary across the map slowly instead of just glancing at it the way I had earlier, tracing the edges with my eyes, as if that would somehow make it line up with what I was seeing on the radar. It didn't. The storm had already moved beyond it, not slightly, not in a way that could be explained by timing or delay, but clearly and consistently, leaving that original polygon behind with each update that came through. Then I looked back at the second alert and followed that path forward, matching it directly to the radar in real time. And the difference between them wasn't subtle anymore. One of them described what had already happened, fixed in place and already outdated, and the other described what was happening right now, continuously updating but never leaving the system. I sat there for a second longer than I should have, letting that settle, because the more I looked at it, the harder it was to convince myself that this was something that would correct itself if I just waited. I moved the cursor over to the manual broadcast panel again, slower this time, paying attention to every small detail of how the interface responded as I opened it, because at that point, I wasn't just looking for a way around the system, I was trying to understand where it actually stopped controlling what happened next. This part of the system wasn't tied directly into the alert lifecycle, and that was the only reason it was still an option at all. I opened it and waited, expecting the same behavior I had seen everywhere else. Something filling in ahead of me, something locking, something moving before I had the chance to decide anything myself. It didn't. The fields stayed empty. No timestamps appeared. No sequence started on its own. Nothing shifted unless I moved it. It just sat there, open and still, in a way that felt completely different from everything else I had been working with. For the first time since the shift started, the system wasn't ahead of me. It wasn't predicting the next step or recording it before I acted. It was waiting, and the longer I stared at it, the more it felt like that was intentional. I stayed there longer than I should have before doing anything. I kept the panel open and didn't type anything right away, but the longer I sat there, the less it felt like I was deciding anything for the first time. I had already seen the way the system moved ahead of me, filling in steps before I took them, logging actions before I confirmed them. And the more I thought about it, the more it felt like this moment wasn't new. I looked at the empty fields, then back at the alerts, then at the radar, trying to slow myself down enough to break the pattern I had been following all night, but nothing about it changed. The path was the same. The timing was the same. Even the hesitation felt familiar, like it was part of the sequence instead of something outside of it. I stayed there longer than I needed to, trying to hold on to the idea that I still had a choice. But the longer I waited, the clearer it became that I wasn't deciding what would happen next. I was arriving at it. I moved my hands onto the keyboard and stopped again, but this time it didn't feel like hesitation. It felt like delay, like I had already missed the moment where the decision mattered and was just catching up to something that had already been set in motion. I kept my eyes on the panel and tried to hold still long enough to change what came next, to break whatever pattern the system had locked me into. But nothing about the moment shifted. The system didn't move ahead of me this time, but it didn't need to. It had already moved earlier, before I even recognized what was happening, setting the sequence in place so that by the time I reached it, there was nothing left to decide. When I finally started typing, it didn't feel like I was choosing anything. It felt like I was confirming something that had already been recorded somewhere I couldn't see, something that didn't need me to understand it for it to happen. I didn't look at the radar when I started typing. I kept my eyes on the panel and entered the path exactly the way I had seen it in the second alert, not rushing it, not cutting corners, making sure every point matched what I had been watching for the past several minutes. The system didn't move ahead of me this time. It didn't fill anything in before I did it. Every field stayed empty until I touched it, and that alone made the process feel different from everything that had happened up to that point. When I finished, I didn't hesitate before sending it. I didn't check the timeline, didn't wait for the next scan, didn't try to confirm it against anything else. I just pushed it through and watched the panel clear the way it was supposed to when something actually left the system. For a second, nothing else happened, and I stayed there, hands still on the keyboard, waiting to see what would change. The confirmation didn't come through the way I expected it to. There was no standard acknowledgement, no clean sequence showing distribution across the usual channels, nothing that matched the pattern I had seen with the first alert. Instead, the panel closed, and the system returned to the main interface without any visible record of what I had just sent. I opened the logs immediately, scrolling through the entries, looking for anything that showed the broadcast had gone out. There was nothing there. No timestamp, no confirmation, no trace of the action I had just taken. I went back to the alerts and checked both records again. The first one was still there, unchanged, fixed in place exactly the way it had been. The second one still existed internally, updating with the storm, untouched by what I had just done. It was like the system had accepted my input and then removed it completely. I stayed where I was for a few seconds after that, not moving the cursor, not touching the keyboard, just watching the screen the way I had been all night, waiting for something to catch up with what I had just done. The radar updated again, and I followed the storm automatically, tracing its path without thinking about it anymore, because at that point, I didn't need to calculate anything. It was already clear where it was going. What I was waiting for wasn't on the map. It was in the system. I opened the logs again and scrolled slower this time, reading each entry instead of searching for something specific, making sure I hadn't missed anything the first time through. The sequence was clean, continuous, exactly what it should have been if nothing unusual had happened. That was the problem. There was no gap where my action should have been, no record that I had done anything at all. I leaned forward and opened the manual panel again, expecting it to at least reflect the input I had just entered, even if it hadn't gone anywhere. It didn't. The fields were empty again, the same as they had been before I typed anything. No saved data, no partial entry, nothing left behind. It was as if the system had reset that part of the interface the moment I finished, clearing it completely instead of storing what I had entered. I moved the cursor back to the alerts again, not because I thought they would change, but because I needed to see them in the same position they had been before. The first one was still there, unchanged, still the only version that had been sent. The second one still tracked the storm internally, updating ahead of me, unaffected by anything I had tried to push through. The system hadn't rejected my action. It had erased it. I didn't try to send it again. The thought came up, clear enough that I knew exactly what I would do differently the second time, how I would enter it faster, how I would push it through without hesitating. But I didn't move. I kept my hands off the keyboard and watched the system the same way I had been watching it all night, waiting to see if anything would surface on its own. now that I had stepped outside of it once. The radar updated again, and the storm continued along the same path, steady and consistent, not slowing down, not correcting itself to match the alert that had already been sent. I opened the logs one more time and scrolled through them without looking for anything specific, just letting my eyes move line by line, making sure I wasn't missing something because I expected it to be there. There was still nothing, no trace, no gap, no indication that anything had been added or removed. I leaned back and let my eyes settle on the main interface instead of jumping between panels, watching the way it held steady between updates, the way nothing shifted unless the system decided it needed to. For a moment, everything looked normal again, the kind of normal that doesn't stand out until you've seen something that breaks it. The first alert was still in place, fixed and already behind the storm, but still the only version that existed outside this room. The second one continued to update internally, tracking the storm exactly the way it was moving, but never crossing the line into anything that would actually reach people. I didn't open it this time. I didn't check the timeline or hover over the fields. I just watched the main screen and let the pattern hold, because at that point, I wasn't trying to change anything anymore. I was trying to understand what part of this I was still connected to. I didn't notice the new entry right away. It didn't come in with a sound or a visual alert that pulled my attention to it. It just appeared in the queue the same way routine entries did, sliding into place without interrupting anything else on the screen. I saw it when I shifted my focus back from the radar, not expecting anything new, just checking the system out of habit. It was tied to the same storm ID, but it wasn't labeled the way the other records had been. Not incoming, not issued, not completed, just present, sitting there without a status, without a timestamp, without any of the markers that would normally tell me where it belonged in the process. I moved the cursor over it slowly and opened it, half expecting it to disappear the way the manual broadcast had. It didn't. The fields were already filled. I didn't touch anything while I read it. The path matched the storm exactly, point for point, more precise than anything I had entered earlier, accounting for every shift I had watched on the radar since the first alert was sent. The timestamps were there too, but they didn't line up with the ones I had been watching all night. They weren't ahead of me or behind me. They sat outside the sequence entirely, like they had been recorded from a different timeline that didn't follow the same order as everything else in the system. I looked at the verification field, then at issuance, then back at the radar, expecting something to shift or correct itself when I compared them. Nothing did. Everything stayed exactly where it was, and for the first time, it didn't feel like I was behind the system or trying to catch up to it. It felt like I wasn't part of it at all anymore. I didn't try to interact with it. I kept the record open for a few seconds, reading through it again without touching the mouse, as if something would shift if I waited long enough. It didn't. The field stayed exactly the same, the path still matching the storm with a level of precision I hadn't seen before, the timestamp still sitting outside anything I could place in the sequence. I closed the entry and let the screen return to the main interface, not because I was done with it, but because I didn't know what else I could do with something that didn't belong to any part of the process I understood. The radar updated again, and I followed the storm out of habit, watching it move further along the same path that was already recorded, already fixed somewhere inside the system. I didn't open the alerts again after that. I stayed for the rest of the shift without touching anything that would move the system forward. I logged what I saw where I was supposed to log it, kept my hands away from anything that would trigger another sequence, and let the hours pass the way they always did on nights that didn't give you a clean ending. By the time the next operator came in, the storm had moved out of range, and the screen had settled back into something that looked normal again, if you didn't compare it to anything that had come before. I didn't mention the second alert, or the manual broadcast, or the record that had appeared at the end without a place in the process. I signed off the shift, left the building, and drove home while the sky was starting to lighten. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't check for reports. I kept the road in front of me, and nothing else. By the time I got home, I already knew I wouldn't be able to tell anyone what had happened in a way that made sense, even if I wanted to. I checked the system again a few days later, not because I expected to find anything different, but because I needed to see if there was any record of what I had done that night that matched what I remembered. The logs were clean at first, exactly the way they were supposed to be. No gaps, no missing entries, no indication that anything had been added or removed outside the normal process. I scrolled through them slowly anyway, not looking for anything specific, just letting my eyes move through the sequence the way I had that night, until I reached the last entry tied to that storm ID. It didn't stand out right away. Same format, same structure, same clean ordering of steps. Then I noticed the operator field. It wasn't blank. It wasn't my name either. I read it again to make sure I wasn't missing something simple, something I could explain without thinking about it too much. I wasn't. It didn't match anything in the system, any ID or name I had seen before. It just sat there, fixed in place the same way everything else did, as if it had always been part of the record. Operator confirmed. Action completed as recorded. When the city sleeps, it notices who doesn't.